Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Distinguished Contributions to Research in Education Award Lecture. I'm Kenneth Wong, Brown University. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Selection Committee and the incoming Chair of the Selection Committee. And the award is the premier recognition of outstanding achievement and success in education research. Its purpose is to publicize, motivate, encourage, and suggest models for education research at its best. And today we are truly honored to have the 2018 recipient of the award, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, to give the distinguished lecture. The title of the talk is Streaming in Public, and after the presentation we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and comments and conversation. Gloria Ladson-Billings needs no introduction, but nonetheless, when I read the CV, it's so long it will take me 2 hours to go through it. So I'm going to condense it and just keep it to maybe about 10 minutes. Okay. Gloria, of course, as you know, is the Kibner Family Distinguished Professor in Urban Education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and faculty affiliate in the Departments of Educational Policy Studies, Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis, and Afro-American Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She was the 2005-06 president of the American Education Research Association. Thank you so much for your service and leadership. And she is currently the president of the National Academy of Education. Ladson-Billings research examines the pedagogical practices of teachers who are successful with African American students. She also investigates critical race theory applications to education. Ladson-Billings is the author of the critically acclaimed, many acclaimed books, The Dream Keepers, The Journey of New Teachers in Diverse Classroom, Beyond the Big House, African American Educators on Teacher Education, and so on and so forth. And she is editor of 6 other books and author of more than 100 journal articles and book chapters. She is the former editor of the AERA and a member of several editorial boards. She has won numerous scholarly awards, including the Palmer O. Johnson Outstanding Research Award, AERA, the Romney's Faculty Fellowship, Spencer Postdoc Fellowship, among others. She is the 2015 winner of the Social Justice in Education Award, given by the American Educational Research Association. She was named the 2012 winner of the Brooke International Prize in Education. Ladson-Billings was awarded numerous honorary degrees from numerous universities around the world. And in 2014, she was a panelist on the White House African American Educational Excellence Initiatives Essence Festival, Smart Starts at Home panel. In 2015, she received the Distinguished Lifetime Achievement Award from the Literacy Research Association. In 2016, she received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Benjamin Banneker Association of the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics. Please welcome Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings.
Thank you, Dr. Wong, and thank you all for being here. I'm obligated to give this talk because I was last year's recipient of the Distinguished Contribution to Educational Research Award, and actually if I had known I had to give the talk, I might have refused the award. I was already had the award in my hand, and then like, next year you got to give the talk. And in full disclosure, I actually gave a version of this talk a few weeks ago at a conference celebrating my retirement at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I told the people there, you don't have to come. Some of them came anyway. I said, 'cause you've already heard it, After all, I'm retired. I don't think I should be obligated to do 2 talks in 1 year. But I've called it Dreaming in Public, Crafting an Academic Career. And of course, the dreaming metaphor is very important to me. If you know my work, I call the teachers that I work with the dream keepers. So I want to set the context for how the talk kind of came about. And I'm probably going to be less formal with it than I would be in a sort of typical research talk, because I'm really talking about myself and what my journey was like. So here's the context. In the Old Testament story of Joseph, he went public with his dream to 10 of his 11 brothers. If you actually know the genealogy of that family, it wasn't all 11, because he had a brother who was younger than him, so he wasn't out there working. So it was the 10 older brothers. And in the dream, he declared that the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed before him. The dream infuriated his family, but it was a dream that spoke to the future that Joseph would eventually have. His brothers hated him because of the dream and what he implied, and they began to plot against him. But his dream is an accurate metaphor for what would happen, but he would be persecuted for sharing it in public. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. also had a dream. And some might argue it was also dangerous for him to dream in public, and that it contributed to the hatred that resulted in his death at an assassin's bullet. Indeed, Sam Cooke had a dream, one that meant owning his own music and creating a label so that Black artists could hold on to their music. His dream frightened mobsters and probably led to his being set up to be murdered. Dream sharing can be incredibly dangerous to do among people with limited vision who will work to thwart true democracy that involves equity and justice. So we always talk to our kids about their dreams, but the problem is you just can't share your dreams with everybody. I know a little bit about the danger of dream sharing and how dreaming in public can make one especially vulnerable. I grew up in a community in which you did not dare share your dreams. The Black working class residents of West Philadelphia did not have the luxury of dreams. The experiences of most adults were consumed with working from dawn to dusk to make enough money, pay the rent, and put food on the table. For children, our days were filled with school, playing with friends, and doing chores. I was, as LL Cool J says, an around-the-way girl. Y'all can't get over how cute I am, right? I'll be like, girl, you was cute. We knew not to expect extravagant gifts, expensive sneakers, fancy leather jackets, or special toys. And I think about this because my kids got half of that kind of stuff, and my grandkids get all of that kind of stuff. They just have to ask. I'm like, okay, when you want it, we'll order it on Amazon. It'll be there tomorrow. I use my Prime membership because you've got to have it right now. You know? But for us, we got many of our so-called new things from the pawn shop and as hand-me-downs from siblings and from cousins. In my neighborhood, you shared your dreams for one purpose: to figure out which illegal number that dream represented, so you or your parents could play it and get rich quick. And I put this dream book up here, but the truth of the matter is my aunt didn't need the book. She had memorized every number. When you came in the house, the first thing she said, and I mean, I have come from across the country to visit, and first thing she says, "Oh, baby, what you dream last night?" Not hi, how you doing, how you been, what you dream last night? Because that was the way we thought about dreams. We were reluctant to share dreams like going to college, or becoming doctors, or attorneys, or growing our own businesses, because we saw so much disappointment. Our typical life trajectories included completing high school, entering the work world, and often the very work of our parents, or enlisting in the armed services. A few of us had aspirations to enter community college, but we did not dare articulate a lofty dream. Four-year colleges were for the children of those who had attended college themselves. Even within the Black community, there were haves and have-nots. And I was born into a family of have-nots. My parents were members of the working class, and working describes them perfectly. And yeah, that's cute, me sitting on that little bench with my mother. I told you I was cute. That's my father's 1956 Plymouth Savoy, which was the newest car he ever purchased. That was in 1957, he bought that car. My father had a third or fourth grade education. He worked tirelessly, generally had 2 or 3 jobs. He labored in a laundry plant during the day. In the evenings, he worked as a janitor, and he cleaned office buildings. And he often maintained what we call a side hustle. He painted people's houses, he did door-to-door sales, and he helped his own brothers at whatever enterprise they were engaged. My mother had a high school diploma, and she went from being a store clerk in Gimbel's department store to a ticketer for the Marine Corps, where she placed tickets on pieces of fabric that would eventually be assembled into uniforms for members of the armed service. And I have to tell you that at one point they were cutting out fabric for the Air Force. And if you've seen an Air Force uniform, they're this kind of interesting blue. My mother brought home what was left of the bulk of the fabric and had her sister make me a coat. And the fabric was so thick that my aunt kept breaking needles on the sewing machine, but she did get the coat done. So you can imagine, I'm the only little girl with a coat that's really an Air Force coat. And people would say, "Oh, it's a nice coat. That's such a familiar look." But they couldn't figure out, like, what store did you get this in? And I was like, "Oh no, this was custom made." But here I am, I'm wearing an Air Force uniform. But that was the reality of our lives. Over time, my mother worked her way up to a clerical position, and she completed a 30-year government career. My parents' aspirations for their children was to have them complete high school and stay out of trouble. As the older of 2 siblings, my brother was the one that they would hope might choose college. So when he opted to enlist in the Air Force, and that's exactly what my coat was like, kind of that, you can't see the color, but it was out of that fabric that he's wearing. It was still considered a win. He wasn't in jail. He wasn't on drugs. He'd gone to the city's best high school, Central High School, the only high school in the state of Pennsylvania that today can offer you a bachelor's degree if they choose to. That's just how elevated this particular school was. But he went from there to the armed forces. He did eventually complete a bachelor's degree and an MBA from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business. But they were not exactly sure about me. I'm still cute, though, that's the thing. I was a good student. I was tops in my class in my segregated black elementary school. And I continue to excel when I moved to the integrated secondary schools in Philadelphia. For those of you who know Philadelphia, that's Overbrook High School, and believe it or not, it was integrated when I went there. It was actually 50% white and 50% black. More specifically, 50% Jewish. But there was a white person in my school that wasn't Jewish. We knew they had gotten kicked out of Catholic school. There's no other reason why you're here. This is a school full of Jewish kids and black kids. There, my classmates were mostly middle class and mostly Jewish. And although my school had significant numbers of black students, my high school was heavily tracked. And I ended up in the honors track with few other black students in my class. In fact, back in those days, Jewish holidays were not school holidays. And so when there was a Jewish holiday, it would often just be me and the teacher, because my high holy days, my classmates were not there. My parents' doubt about my destiny was actually not linked to my academic prowess. Rather, it was their concern about my insistence on being a participant observer of all things social. That's a nice way of saying I never met a party that I didn't feel a strong obligation to attend. Those of you who remember when I was AERA president, I had the first party, remember? 2000, we had a party, a real party. I had no real idea what kind of professional career I wanted to pursue. The one thing I considered was, quote, a medical technician, mainly because it sounded fancy and you didn't have to go to medical school to do it. You could just have this title. However, the one thing I loved most was writing. I just couldn't figure out how to get paid doing that. And my family could not afford me the luxury of the time to find my writing voice. I would always say when I was in college, I was like, how am I going to go home and tell these people I'm a writer? And my friends would say, you ain't. Because that's not going to work in your house. I needed to do something that would allow me to earn a living, and that thing became teaching. And I think that burst the bubble of a lot of my teacher ed students, because they want to have a story about how I always wanted to be a teacher. I did not. But I had to do something. As my family is like, you need insurance. And that's how they say it, insurance. So I'm aware, like I said, that I burst everyone's nice bubble about having noble, lofty aspirations to be a teacher. But I didn't want to be a teacher. It took walking into a classroom, interacting with students, and learning how to teach that helped me become a teacher and to fall in love with the work of teaching. Helped me understand that one of the most effective ways that we could affect the democracy was actually through the classroom. When I saw the degree to which students relied on their teachers and the school environment for shaping their sense of themselves as individuals, community members, and as citizens, I understood that I could actually impact the society in which I lived. It took my 10 years in Philadelphia classrooms and another 3 in California classrooms to help me focus and formulate my dream. This means it was about at age 33 that I was just figuring out what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I hope that's an encouragement to some of you who have started over and your family members are looking at you like you're crazy, because they looked at me when I said, I'm going to graduate school, and they're like, you gonna quit that good job? What's wrong with her? It's not the kind of dream you share. I was a wife, a mother, a holder of Pennsylvania and California teaching certificates, and I still didn't know what I wanted to be. My journey as a graduate student at Stanford in some way sidetracked my dreams. I knew when I entered graduate study in the 1970s, I had some questions about why black children were not successful in schools. And I knew too many smart black people, and their school outcomes just didn't make sense. Unfortunately, I did not find a lot of intellectual support at Stanford for the questions that plagued me. So some of you may be in that same situation. I'm speaking right now to the graduate students in the room, that these institutions don't always care about what you care about, but don't let that sidetrack you from what it is you want to do. So I ended up conducting a study that looked at black early adolescents' sense of themselves as citizens in the US. And I posited that civic engagement and patriotic affiliation were mediated by cultural and ethnic affiliation. What I was able to get from Stanford was a good set of research skills and exposure to the extant theories and concepts. I got to interact with some of the top scholars in the field and to learn the ways of the academy. My first position after graduating from Stanford was as academic staff at Santa Clara University. It was not a tenure-track job in a powerhouse school or college of education. I was the coordinator of teacher education. I want to thank Joyce King publicly for offering me that position. And part of my job was making student teaching placements and organizing aspects of our teacher certification program. I also taught courses as an adjunct professor in the program, 7 courses to be exact. But in the midst of this nonstop busy work, I was still dreaming. First opportunity I had to begin speaking my dream aloud came when I saw the announcement for the National Academy of Education's Spencer Postdoctoral Fellowship. I had 2 hunches. One was that black students in classrooms of skillful teachers could be academically, culturally, socially, and civically successful. The second hunch was that African American teachers, whose numbers were dwindling, could be key to black student success. Unfortunately, I had a fear that because black teachers were leaving the field in disturbing numbers, we were missing an opportunity to capture their pedagogical expertise. My academic project became organized around the idea of flipping a long-standing education question. I'm going to put a pin right here. I want you to note the trajectory here. The work that became my life work was not the work I did as a doctoral student. Now, some of you are fortunate and blessed enough to be already on your life work trajectory in doctoral school, but I got rid of that dissertation as soon as I could. Deborah Ball had me Skype into her class, and I told her, every time I go back to Stanford, I go to Coverly Library and mis-shelve my dissertation because I don't want nobody to find that dissertation. So I had another colleague of mine who said the same thing. He said, listen, I put $20 inside my dissertation. And he said, every time I go back, that $20 is ready. He said, ain't nobody reading this. You know. So I just want to point out that this doesn't have to be your life work. You could find something beyond, this. If you love what you're doing, stay with it. But don't feel like it's put you on a track that you can't do what you really want to do. As I said, my academic project became organized around the idea of flipping a long-standing education question. And throughout my time in graduate school, the literature I read essentially asked the question, what is wrong with black children? And by default, their parents, their community, and their culture. An entire education research industry was built on a conception of black students as deficient, disadvantaged, and deviant. Tons of scholarship asserted that their parents didn't speak enough words to them, read to them enough, provide them with enough toys. The research further asserted that black children's language was an impediment to their ability to learn mathematics, and we decreed that they were culturally deprived and at risk. Sorry, I'm a slide behind. More recently, people have begun talking about the children coming from a culture of poverty. This perspective argued that there was something wrong with students' entire culture and that the role of the school was to make them comply and bring order to their lives. Nothing in this literature speaks to improving students' academic outcomes. If you read that culturally deprived stuff, it's not about those kids getting better in the classroom. It's about them sitting down behaving. So recently, a literature has emerged suggesting that what our students lack is grit. Without fully understanding the degree to which black students regularly display resilience, persistence, and grace under fire. Who else could have continued to go to school amid angry white mobs and constant threats? Who else was required to get up at 4:30 or 5 a.m. to travel across town to attend a school where they may not have been welcome? Who else is assumed to be a problem as opposed to being a person with problems? At the heart of this mountain of research was the question, what is wrong with black children? I knew that black children did not lack grit. They have plenty of grit, and it's plural. As I have said previously, the innovation I believe that I brought to the field was a very different question. That instead of asking what is wrong with black students, I dared to ask what is right with black students. And what do we know about the teachers, the classrooms, and the parents who get it right? So my work essentially was about helping teachers and administrators and researchers see black children, not as a stereotype, but as a prototype. The question about what was right with black children led to a chain of inquiry with teachers that I called dream keepers. And I did this work not merely to showcase the amazing pedagogical skills of these teachers, but rather to help the hundreds of thousands of white teachers who are and will be charged with educating black children. However, in the midst of this inquiry, I kept seeing how race was operating and being deployed to tell a very different story about black students, black parents, and black culture writ large. These stories of black life and culture regularly disintegrated into the issue of race, a spurious, socially constructed notion about human superiority versus inferiority. So along with my colleague, William Tate, and we was cute back then too, I had the opportunity to explore what legal scholars call critical race theory. This work forced me into the law library, where I saw how a lack of sound theory about race kept us chasing our intellectual tails, trying to make sense of how black people always come out on the short end. The work of critical race theory scholars like Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, Linda Green, Cheryl Harris, Patricia Williams, and many others brought clarity to how the construct of race was central to understanding how the U.S. organized its form of democracy. It was critical race theory that dared to articulate the notion that racism was normal, not aberrant, in our society. It was critical race theory that spoke to the power of story or counter-story as a vehicle for articulating the realities of black life. It was critical race theory that argued that our intersectional identities, be they race, class, gender, sexuality, and ability, and so forth, are displayed in ways that can regularly disadvantage and disenfranchise us. And it was critical race theory that posited that the only advantages that black people can receive in this society are those that intersect or converge with the desires and wishes of white people. This constellation of propositions helped to answer so many questions regarding inequality in America, as well as the persistent failure of our children in U.S. schools. So critical race theory was not merely defaulting to a notion of the system as a problem, but rather it was expanding my understanding of how what undergirded our thinking and our acting and our symbols and our ways of being in the world were all conspiring to keep race and racism firmly in place. So I ask you to take, for example, the way Christianity is organized around a Western European conception of faith. No one objects to depictions of biblical characters as if they emerged from England. Just think about the geographic reality. This is not an argument for who is white or black. That's the geography here. Moses grew up in the household of Pharaoh. Wouldn't he have to resemble the people of Egypt? Which incidentally is in Africa. I feel like I always have to tell people that. Okay.
You do.
But wouldn't he have to look like those folks to avoid being questionable? Wouldn't they be saying, where you get that baby from? What is he doing here? He had to kind of look like them. And similarly, when Mary and Joseph were told to flee to Egypt for the safety of the Christ child, don't you think if Jesus actually looked like the Western world depicts him, that somebody in an Egyptian neighborhood would have said, have you seen that blonde hair baby that's looking back? I mean, how you gonna hide in a place where you are so obvious? Doesn't it make better sense that they were admonished to go hide in Egypt because they could blend in there? And this is not an argument about who is black. Rather, what I'm pointing out is the ways that race has constructed our image of each and everything in our lives, that we accept those constructions without question. So using the lens of critical race theory, I was able to develop a powerful explanation of how curricular, pedagogical, discipline, school funding, testing, staffing, and policy decisions always end up favoring white middle-income students. Indeed, everything we know about statistical randomness says that black children should win at least once in a while. So I find it interesting that when I got into this aspect of my work, many of my white colleagues and white students would gravitate towards my work on culturally relevant pedagogy. Somehow they reinterpret it as a feel-good story where good, hard-working teachers get the best out of those poor black children. But it's not the lesson of my work at all. The work with those teachers serves as what I call existence proofs, that our children have the same intellectual capacities as their more affluent white peers, and we need to look elsewhere for explaining school failure. However, the work on critical race theory is less universally accepted. The argument that racism is both normal and permanent flies in the face of a liberal discourse that is grounded in the notion of constant progress. Now, again, I'll put a pin in this. When I earned tenure at Wisconsin, we are an open record state, and at that time, you got to see your entire file after they made their decision, so it came back to you, and nothing was redacted. all right? So I saw all my letters. I know who wrote what, all right? And indeed, Fred Erickson wrote me one of the most beautiful letters ever. And I had dinner with Fred a few years ago when I copied the letter. And I said, Fred, I just want you to know how much I appreciated this letter. And it's funny because he read it. He's like, this is a good letter. I'm like, yeah, Fred, it was real good. But I can also tell you that someone else who was quite eminent in the field, and of course I will not disclose the name, but really, really eminent in the field, praised the work I did in culturally relevant pedagogy, said it was cutting edge, it's going to change teacher education. But their very words were, but I am less sanguine about this work on critical race theory. I don't like it in the social sciences. It would not like to see it in education. Now, I don't know if you've looked in the back of the program book, but if you look under the descriptor critical race theory, it's 1,000,000 sessions on critical race theory. Now, I'm not saying they're all good sessions, but they're in there. And I was not dissuaded. Another thing I'm saying to those of you who are just starting your careers, there can be people who are very much at the top of the field who will say what you're doing is wrong. You have got to hold on to that dream and not be discouraged. As I said, people don't like critical race theory because it flies in the face of liberal discourse that's grounded in the notion of constant progress. And while one can clearly point to social improvements along the lines of race, you cannot say that a journey that began some 410 years ago and still has stark disparities is actually progress. One of the real conundrums with which we are faced is that we are, according to Harvard historian Walter Johnson, telling at least two very different stories. Mainstream America believes that theirs is a story of democracy grounded in the fight for freedom. Black America's story of democracy is one of fighting and release as former prisoners of war. You cannot talk about fighting for the same thing when the cause of the subordinated group's anguish is at the hands of those whose freedom relies on Black people's lack of access to the resources for that freedom. If one group's access to high-quality housing relies on displacement of the other group's access to affordable housing, that's not fighting together for freedom. You cannot talk about fighting for the same thing when one group's access to something as basic as access to fresh water is linked to the reality of another group's continuing to have lead-based water flowing in their homes. You cannot talk about fighting for the same thing when one group's access to quality education relies on continuing to underfund schools and sending inexperienced and poorly prepared teachers to the other group. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that we are in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. The optimistic exegesis of that statement is to see us as sinking and rising together. However, the manifestation of the statement in a society that positions us as either winners or losers suggests that in order for some to win, others must lose. And critical race theory regularly points out this dialectical relationship as a purposeful, deliberate way of reinforcing the racial fault lines. My research operates on both the empirical documentation of successful school outcomes for Black children and the theoretical challenge of making race, a totally nonsensical concept, make sense in our understanding of persistent and egregious inequality. On the one hand, I am presenting strong warrants for what democratic classrooms can and should look like. On the other hand, I have another set of warrants, what my young folks call receipts, for the way that inequality and undemocratic practices are baked into the society that students confront beyond the doors of their classrooms. So I consider my research legacy the 10 authored single-authored and edited books, the more than 100 journal-authored articles and book chapters, the hundreds of public presentations, the scores of honors and awards, the 5 honorary doctorates, as the Apostle Paul would say, as filthy rags. They may be the currency of the academy, but they mean nothing to the everyday realities of black children who are abused and violated in our schools. My real legacy or distinction in the academy is in the number of students I've had the opportunity to teach, to advise, and to mentor. Hundreds of them in public schools in Philadelphia and East Palo Alto, California. Scores of them at Stanford University and Santa Clara University. Dozens at 3 summer school classes at the University of Washington. Hundreds of undergraduates and graduates at the University of Wisconsin-Madison over 27 years. 53 doctoral students, 21 of whom are black women. All represent all of them representing my real legacy. They are the dream that I had in public. And I'm going to ask everybody in here, because I've seen y'all, so I'll call you by name if you don't do it, all of my students to stand up. That's the real pride of my work. And I know it was for outstanding research, but anybody who really understands research knows that there is an integral relationship between teaching and research. And it has been the ability to work with these young people to begin to project the dream beyond my head and into their lives, and as they project it into the lives of their students, that is really my real distinguished contribution to education research. Thank you. So I think we're supposed to do some Q&A?
Yes.
Okay. So questions that you have sort of about my journey, maybe things that I didn't discuss that you might have a question about as you are perhaps on your own journeys. Yes, Beverly. A mic is coming to you.
I have a comment and a question on something you wrote recently in Diverse Issues in Higher Education when Donna Shalala became the congresswoman in Florida, and she had been 2 university presidents. But the relationship between that kind of work and how people like Donna Shalala and your work on black children came about.
So I never wanted to go to Wisconsin, at least in the beginning. You know, I'm living that California life, right? And I had the, especially good fortune to meet Carl Grant at a event at the College Board. And he was impressed with the talk that I gave. And it was really at the beginning of the Dreamkeepers work, and I gave a talk to the College Board. And so Carl approached me about coming to Wisconsin, and I said, no, I'm not going there. I'm a coastie, right? I'm either going to be on the East Coast or the West Coast. I don't actually believe there is something called the Midwest. I think they just tell y'all that so y'all don't get nervous about how the thing is held together, right? So that's really God's sense of humor to plot me down there. And but I said I wasn't interested, so he said, well, why don't you just come and give a talk? You don't have to apply for a job. Well, I gave the talk, but Carl is a very smart man. And during my time there, he took me to Donna Shalala's house for dinner. And I walked in and I was cordial, and I said, hello, I'm Gloria Ladson-Billings, Santa Clara University. And Donna said, what do we need to do to get you? And I said, no, I have a job. And she said, that's not the question I asked you. So for those of you who know Donna, she's about this high, but she is the most powerful little firebrand you will ever encounter. And actually in my year as president, I actually had her come back and give one of the plenary sessions. I always tell her, I said, you still owe me because I'm still in Wisconsin. You know, you went to Miami, now you going to you went to Washington, then you went to Miami, now you back in Washington, you owe me, you know. But her framing that question, you know, making that statement like that made me think about, well, you know, maybe it is a possibility. So when I went back home and talked with my husband, he said, well, you know, a decision to go there is not a decision to stay there. And so, you know, me, naive, oh, yeah, right, we could go there. We a couple of years, then we'll leave, right? So in some ways it was, but the other thing that happened, they did invite me back for a job talk. So I was sort of pursuing it. And again, Carl Grant, in a conversation, and I will never forget this because it was one of the most powerful things that a colleague could have said to me. Carl said, Gloria, these people are crazy about you. They really, really like you. He said, but you don't have to come here. But you do have to get off that campus that you are on. It can never support the work you want to do. And why that was so powerful to me is that he wasn't trying to get a feather in his cap by saying, oh, I brought in this new person. No, he was looking out for me saying, your career can't go where it needs to go, where you are. And so I think it was not so much Wisconsin as it was the fact that it was going to be a place that could support the work that I wanted to do. And that Donna, the other thing I will tell you is that when I came to Wisconsin in 1991, my first piece of news is that I had developed breast cancer. New town, didn't have any family support, just our little nuclear family, my husband and my daughter. Didn't really have any friends, didn't have a church. I didn't have any of that stuff. But Donna Shalala said to me, do not worry. She said, don't worry about the insurance. Don't worry about the classes. We will get you through this. And she did. So it was that kind of leadership that let me know that I could do the work I wanted to do here because she was investing in me as a human being. So, another question? Yes, this one over here. He's right behind this stanchion. Mike guy is coming.
Thank you so much for your talk. I really appreciate you sharing your journey with us.
Thank you.
You spoke a bit about the idea that in one sense, we have a recruitment, but also a retention problem for Black people broadly in education. And as a graduate student myself, I'm finding that there's some structural issues with maintaining Black students in graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times because of a kind of a toxic hazing culture from advisor, mentor to advisee.
Mm-hmm.
You are, of course, a success story of having mentored numerous different advisees. Can you talk a bit about some of the practical things that you've implemented and you've passed on to your advisees to not reproduce the toxic culture in academia?
Okay. I'm going to answer your question by sharing with you an experience I had maybe about 8 or 9 years ago. I was being considered for a deanship at a really good school. If I'd taken the job, I would have been the only Black dean on the campus. But I've been in those only, first and only situations before, so that wasn't the problem. During my visit, one of the things they asked me to do was to go to dinner with all the other deans. And so one of the deans came to pick me up for dinner, and I'm telling you, no sooner than I got in her car, she said the following to me. You know, we're spending all this money on all these Black faculty, and they don't even stay here. And I'm like, and hello, how are you? But then I said to her, I said, oh, that's the case, huh? I said, imagine that they offer me this job and I actually take it. Where would you tell me to get my hair done? And she said, and she named a city that was an hour and a half away. And I said, so I'm supposed to drive an hour and a half, find the one black salon that's on time. Because that's another hour, and then drive an hour and a half back twice a month. 4 hours of my time is not doing research, writing, teaching. I'm doing that. I said, that's not true. I've been on your campus for at least 2 days, and I've seen plenty of black women, and they're not driving to that city. I said, what you don't understand is you think it's about the money. It's most often about the quality of life. And so I started with that story because that's what our students are dealing with, quality of life issues. What can I do beyond the campus? Where can I have recreation? Where can I find, if they have children, where are my kids going to go to school? If I'm a person of faith, where can I go to church? What clubs and organizations can I be a part of? And often when I go to campuses, I see extensive recruitment plans and nothing in the way of retention. This sense that now we got you, you're supposed to be happy here. So when I think about, one of the reasons I think I stayed at Wisconsin for 27 years is because I was like, they need somebody here. It's a good place in terms of its academics, but they can't be pushed out and discouraged. They've got to have somebody. I didn't really have anybody to work with at Stanford. I ended up going to anthropology because people were nice to me, but not interested in what I was interested in. So part of it is just being there was important for my students. I think the other thing that, and they can tell you out of their own mouths, is that I tried to keep it 100 with them, I didn't try to make it be like it was something it wasn't. I tried to help them with the strategies of the academy. I warned them that the best place to live is not always the best place to work and vice versa, so that the best job is not always in the best place. And that they had to sort of weigh out what was the most important for them, whether they really wanted a job, So, I'm smiling because I remember Kevin and I was on the phone forever, and he was like, but these people over here want me. I don't care about them people. That's not the good job for you. But take this job. And so it's funny because if you know the tradition of black culture, my white students have no problem saying Gloria this, Gloria that, Gloria, and I'm okay. I'm secure in who I am. But my black students, for the most part, have grown up in a culture where someone has some kind of title, you use it, so they're always with professor or doctor. So they finally got an affectation for me, and so now they call me Big Mama. So when they talk to each other, they go, well, what did Big Mama say? Did Big Mama say you could? You shouldn't do that. Big Mama didn't say you could do that. But I think that comes out of my extending myself to them as someone who loves them, And I don't just love them because they're black students. I have white students in this room, too. Did Jennifer leave on me? Where you at, Jennifer? I try to make people feel like this is a person talking to you with a sincere interest in what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go. And I think that sincerity of the relationship it comes through. And then also being willing to learn from them. I have learned as much in these last 27 years from working with these brilliant young people than they have learned from me. Actually, they got the short end of the stick, But it's being in this sort of reciprocal and mutual relationship that I think is really important. So, you got somebody over here?
Hi, Gloria.
Hi. How you doing, Gloria?
Okay, I'm interested in nurturing and support, and especially around support in relation to black women. And first of all, thank you so much. I really appreciated what you were saying. And I wonder whether you could just, in relation to illustrate that regarding the little thing that took place in China, and there was there was some nurturing going on to ensure that you were okay.
Yeah, I want to be careful, but this is a public event, right? One of the things that, I prepared to be a teacher of U.S. history, and because I do have a deep love of history, and the writing came in because I had an English minor. I loved them both, couldn't make a choice, gravitated towards the history. So one of the things I've always done, no matter what institution that I've been a part of, is I've read the history of the institution. And when you read it, you figure out where you fit, at least in the conception of it. So conceptually, there is absolutely zero place for me at Stanford University, because Elwood P. Cubberley didn't think I had an intellect. Stanford is a place that Lewis Terman was at, and if you know the Stanford-Binet, the test, and all those gifted studies, I have colleagues at Wisconsin who call themselves termites because they were in those studies of gifted kids. But if you go back, and the researchers will tell you that this is such a flawed sample because all of them are white. Because there was this belief that there could not be giftedness among black, brown, red, yellow kids. No, they couldn't be gifted. Only this group can be gifted. So one of the things I used to do at Stanford all the time was walk through the Terman building, even if it was the long way around. And my classmates said, "Why you walk through there?" I said, "I need Lewis Terman to know I'm here." I just feel good walking through here. I'm here. Yeah, I'm here. So, but I knew that there was an institution that had not been designed for me. Now, it doesn't mean that institutions can't change, because what we're actually seeing among the major public institutions, land grants like Michigan and North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Wisconsin, Berkeley, right now the average per capita income of our freshman classes in these schools is over $127,000. They've become public Ivies. So one of the things that I keep bringing up to folks on the Board of Regents and what have you is that you actually believe that the farmers of Wisconsin in 1848 said, "Ooh, let's build us a school for the rich people." That was never the conception. So that can change. So part of figuring out your place in these environments is figuring out what was their intent. Not saying that you can't be in it, but think about what were they intending when they started this, and how you might be actually remaking that institution. So, did I answer your question for you? Did
For you?
Oh. Yeah, summarize it. I just remember your daughter putting her hand in that bowl for them shrimp. That's the only thing I remember. But, Mommy, I'm hungry.
You was the keynote, and you'd been invited as a keynote, and there needed to be some nurturing, because as you walked along, there was no seat at the table.
Okay.
And so it was somebody, i.e. myself, who kind of noticed and needed to kind of.
Yeah, I mean, we also often run up against culture clash. I gave a talk in Japan once, and they were all shocked when I showed up. And they invited me. But I was the only woman in the entire panel, and then I was black. And it was like, oh, whoa. So I don't take that necessarily as the same kind of, quote, racism, but a different kind of hierarchy. On one of my visits in China, these people kept running behind me. And I said to my translator, I said, let's just stop and let them take this picture. And because they wanted to take a picture of me. And they were apologetic, and they were just saying, they were pointing to my hair, saying, trying to say that, oh, you have this different color hair. And I was like, that's not it. It's this. So this, but I didn't take that as the same kind of racism that I might experience in Wisconsin or Florida or any other place in the U.S. So I didn't feel that as a slight so much as it was that I felt like it was just someone's overlooked, but that, you saw it and you attended to it. So I think this.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful talk. I've heard you many times. And the thing that I'm thinking about as a doctoral student in Michigan with Carla O'Connor, you are so prolific, like dynamic in so many spaces with your students, in the public. Can you tell us how you maintain or find the quiet space to actually write and do your work, given the amount of responsibilities that you've had throughout your career?
So I think that part of it is how I actually envision my life. I won't say career, my life. And I often get students who'll say, well, how do you keep balance? Balance is a fiction. It's a fiction. Anybody who has in a long-term love relationship, no, ain't no 50. Teddy Pendergrass done told you, it ain't 50-50. Sometimes it's 60-40, right? 80-20, it's all that stuff, right? So when you're trying to balance work, we talk about work-life balance, that's a fiction. You're always going to be chasing that. So I think the metaphor for what I try to do is what I would call integration. How do you pull all these things together? When I am sitting in church and I hear something profound from the pulpit, I'm like, I'm going to use that in class. That's good. Ooh, that's good. He said that. I'm smiling because my former student, Adria Dixon, she does workshops and makes the teachers turn to your neighbor and say, right? Well, that's something we say in church, right? So we're not trying to leave parts of our lives. We're trying to figure out, how does this whole thing work together more seamlessly? So the person that I try to be in the community is not different than the person I try to be at the university. In fact, when I was doing my dissertation research, I was working with some parents in East Palo Alto, and one woman said to me, she said, well, Gloria, what do you do? I said, I'm a graduate student at Stanford. She said, really? What that made me feel like was, I hadn't tried to come over here and say, I'm a graduate student from Stanford and y'all supposed to all just pay attention to me. It was that I had really become a member of the community. So I think that notion of the integration, that no matter where I am, I'm thinking about other parts of my life. I don't leave my kids and my grandkids out of my thinking about my life and my work. I don't leave the community out of the university stuff. I don't leave the university out of the community. The university has resources. It has stuff it could contribute. And so I have no trouble trying to leverage those different pieces if the ultimate objective is to make life better for people. So, how are we doing on time, Ken?
We still have 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, all right.
We're good.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Building on that question, I'm wondering if you could talk about one challenging decision you made where you, in retrospect, would have never done that again, either in your research, your engagement, or your framing of an inquiry question.
I probably wouldn't have done the dissertation that I did. No, really. I was too far down the road that I couldn't turn around, and I just needed to get out of school. So if I had it to do over, and part of what happened to me, I was in a department program in curriculum and teacher ed at Stanford. And I came in thinking I was a curriculum person. I had written curriculum for the School District of Philadelphia. I liked doing it, had a wonderful curriculum writing group there. And I literally thought that when I finished at Stanford, I would go back to Philadelphia and be the assistant superintendent of curriculum. But I began to see that the curriculum wasn't a problem. I mean, yeah, there's bad curriculum out there. But even great curriculum in the hands of a bad teacher is going to be terrible. And I got to see great teachers who had limited resources and limited curriculum turn that whole thing around. So I was shifting from a curriculum person to a more teaching and learning or instructional person in the midst of my graduate study, and I just didn't want to start all over again, so I just plugged my way along and got it done. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor. So I guess it's a two-part question. One is that you started off talking about your family and your parents and how they didn't necessarily consider you or think of you in terms of like college or what that would be like. And so once you actually did go to college, what was their sort of feeling about and support or response to that? And secondly, you ended talking about your legacy. And I remember listening to a talk that you gave at Oakland High School, and you talked about the toasters and how that's what black people give each other.
I gave the toaster to the George King's
at the
son.
wedding, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That toaster cost a grip from William and Sonoma. I'm like, if this boy don't stay with this girl, send me that toaster back. William and Sonoma. What is wrong with these children?
So you talked about how your legacy, and I'm linking the toasters to inheritance. So like your legacy really, you talked about is your students, but I also want to extend for those of us who didn't actually have the opportunity to have your classes or have you be our advisor, your books, and that's your legacy for us, and that is what we actually are able to learn from you. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Right. So my parents, I had wonderful parents, so don't go out here thinking she had terrible. I had great parents. But they only knew so much because of where they ended up in the society. My mother didn't understand that I had turned down a scholarship to an Ivy League institution. I was accepted at the University of Pennsylvania, and I didn't go. I went to Morgan State University, and not one day am I sorry that I made that decision. I really wanted to go to an HBCU. But you heard my high school story, right? That had been in classes with white students. I knew I could compete. I just wanted to go to a place that was going to nurture me. So that was one thing they didn't know about me. The other story I want to tell you about them not fully understanding what I do. Some years after I was at Wisconsin, I was doing my work, and Fred Erickson invited me to be a keynote speaker at the Ethnography and Education Forum. And so it was in Philly, it was at Penn. And so I said to Fred, Fred, I'd like to bring my mother, because she has never seen any of this stuff. She came to my graduation, she was very proud. So I brought my mother, and Fred said, of course, we'll give her a place of honor. So they had my mother sitting right up front. And I gave the talk, and, if I say so myself, it was a good talk. It was a good talk, right? Because Mama's there, right? And, people gave me a standing ovation. At the end of the talk, people are coming up to me, asking me questions. And my mother comes up to me just by my side and whispers in my ear. She says, "So this is what you do, huh?" So I said, "Well, yeah, some of the time." She said, "I could do this." She said, "But only part-time." So it reminded me, back to this integrated life thing. Don't get all caught up in that. And I get it from both ends. My daughter, when she was about 8 or 9 years old, came into my office. Now, I got all these AERA and you name it awards all along the walls. And she looked up at that wall and she said, "Ooh, this stuff must be cheap." Because it's like you got a lot of them, It's like, so it's important for you not to take yourself too seriously, not to be caught up with the titles and acclamations, and because number one, there's always somebody else coming behind you. I have a granddaughter who is a star in the WNBA. I am no longer the famous person in the family, you know, and that's as it should be. It should be another generation that is coming and doing bigger and better things. And it's literally what my family wanted for us. They couldn't articulate it. They didn't know what it would be. For them, being a teacher was like that's the best thing you could be. So they didn't understand academic life. But they were really proud of me. And I get invited back to my home church. I give the commencement address for them. And, and they say, we're just so proud of you. It is the responsibility, I think, of those of us who have had those trajectories where we have come from a non-academic, a non-professional background who do make it into that level of society. It's our responsibility to represent those people well. I remember a student saying to me once at Santa Clara, well, I don't know why you're, talking about this, that, and the other. Look at you. You did it. And I said, the part you can't see are all those bodies that are literally under me who are either sitting in jail, who are addicted, who are at a place of hopelessness, but they actually did sacrifice so that I could stand here. And I think that's the thing that we have to understand, that we are embodying so many other people when we stand in front of a classroom, when we put our name on a book or a monograph. It isn't separate. And those are some of you guys will remember that I have this I think I got this from Joyce, right? It's a little, one of those really horrible black icons of a little black boy eating a watermelon. I have it in my office. I used to keep it on the top of the computer, and my white colleagues just hated it because it's that horrible, you get it in New Orleans, that iconography, right? And my white colleagues, oh, Gloria, just don't have that there. Oh, that's just terrible. Why do you have that? And I say, I have it because it's my reminder that outside of the trappings of this office, this is how y'all see me. I'm not special. I'm just another black person. And that's the nice way of putting it, right? So you can't lose sight of that. You have to always remember that this society that we are in does not value us, does not value us as black people, does not value us as women. Do not value us if we are not able-bodied, does not value us if we are not cisgendered. I mean, all of those things are operating when it doesn't value us if our first language is other than English. All of those things still happen no matter how many, as my cousins will say, initials you got behind your name. You got initials behind your name? That doesn't change who we are in the world. So, and I appreciate your thinking that the writing is really the legacies. Some of that stuff ain't all that good, I'm going to tell you that right now. There's a person here. How are we doing on time?
Maybe 10 more minutes.
Okay, just so I don't want to go over.
I don't have a question, but I just simply want to say thank you.
You're welcome.
Particularly thinking about culturally relevant pedagogy and critical race theory. I think the lenses that you've provided have given, well, first of all, I'm a doctoral student myself, and it's given me, even as a teacher for 6 years, just a new way to sort of reframe my teaching and my perspectives, and my students have appreciated it too, because it's really given my first and second and fourth graders just this feeling of they matter and they have a voice. So I appreciate it, and they do too. So thank you.
I think you never know the impact that you have on a young person. I'm thinking now, Tori Wynn is here. Raise your hand, Tori. He has two of the loveliest little boys you ever want to meet, Obasi and Zafir. And we were all in South Africa last summer. And when they got home, their mom, Maisha, asked them, well, what y'all like best about South Africa? They said, we saw Auntie Gloria. Then they're going halfway around the world. But why I'm saying that is because you don't know what you're pouring into someone's life. I mean, yeah, South Africa, Cape Town is magnificent, right? There's Table Mountain, there's this, but what they remembered is that someone who has cared for and loved on them was there. We often get this whole thing twisted. I think that my students, yeah, you know, Bucky Badger's okay. I mean, you know, with his big head self, right? You know, but they really care about the relationship. We were saying at the retirement celebration that we created something I think really unique among graduate students. That my graduate students really are family and are jealous like family members too. I took Shamika and Kevin with me once when they were graduate students down to Illinois for a conference that Adrian was having. So she and Jamel Donner, who are my older children, said, why you bring the neighbor kids with you? And I said, no, these are my students too. They ain't none of our family. I mean, and they just harassed us so much. So when each of them finished their dissertation, I sent emails out to the older children that said, the adoption papers are signed and filed. Please say welcome to your new brothers and sisters. But it was that kind of sense that we are a family. We're there for one another. We support one another. In the montage, they tease Kevin, because I showed that montage at the retirement thing, because there's more pictures of him, they think. Actually, there's more pictures of Jamel. But they saw Kevin, so they kept calling him Joseph, like Joseph in the story in the Bible. Come on, Joseph, we're going to dinner. It's that wonderful camaraderie where they can be themselves and they don't feel like they have to be someone else. And I can tell you, we've all had to struggle with that being someone else. I'm going to tell on Joyce's son, Jabari. Joyce and I were in a conference call, and her son, Jabari, was there. He was a little boy at that time. We got off the call, and Jabari looked at us. He said, what was wrong with y'all voices? Because, you know, we're trying to sound like we know what we're talking about. You know, you're trying to get that money. You can't go Ebonics for the money. That part you know. You know. So we're using all the correct terminology and, and Jabari, and he noticed, and he called us on it. He said, what's wrong with y'all? Well, why y'all talking like that? It's those moments when you realize, you know, your whole self is in the room all the time, and you're making an impression on people, and particularly young people. So, this one back here. Is this person?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ladson-Billings, for all your work and really paving the way for doctoral students like myself. And so just going off of that discussion of CRP and CRT, I just find as I continue in graduate school, I want to distance myself from CRP because I see how it's kind of used within, you know, my college to distance from race and really focus on this idea of culture. And I cling towards CRT. So maybe if you can just give some advice or talk about how to kind of think through that.
Well, I think the challenge of writing, and I think it was Geneva Gay who shared this with me, is that once you write it and publish it, you have lost all control over it. You have no control over what people will mean and do with it. And I think about one of the first classes I took at Stanford was with Elizabeth Cohen, the late educational sociologist. And most of you may not know Liz's name, but you know the terms cooperative learning. Liz developed a theory that undergirded cooperative learning, and that theory was based on this notion of unequal status, the status differences, right? That kids come into the classroom just because of who they are, their race, their class, their gender, their first language, and they get treated differently because of their status, not because of anything they've done. And so what she theorized is that you had to create environments in which those kids could be seen as capable, and that environment is cooperative learning. Nobody doing cooperative learning talks about status differential. Nobody doing cooperative learning understands anything about what it was that she was trying to do with it. They've taken it and made it acute activity, a different way. And that's not unusual. Many of the innovations that we see in schooling come as a result of somebody having done some work with black children, with poor children, trying to figure something out, and then it spins into something else. So I don't have control over what people have decided to. It's one of the reasons why I've never created a package around culturally relevant. I've had somebody come and try to sell me one. I'm like, really? Because I don't want people to get caught up in it. It's a set of these strategies and recipes. Before coming here to Toronto, I was at NCTM. I did a keynote for the NCTM address conference in San Diego. And someone asked me a question about the strategies that needed. And I explained to them is that if you have a teacher who doesn't believe that children can learn, there are no amount of strategies I can give you that will change the learning outcomes. You have to have a basic belief in the capabilities of the learners. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised that people have distorted it and people tell me, listen, I went to my daughter's back to school night parent-teacher conference and got into the English class, and the man told me, oh, I'm so glad to meet you. You know, I'm a culturally relevant pedagogue. And I'm like, Jesus. Now I'm sitting here knowing this is the worst teacher the girl has because she done told me all the stuff he's done. I couldn't tell him, no, you not. But I'm thinking that the whole time. So it's out of my hands at this point. I wouldn't shy away from it. What I would ask you to do is to bring integrity back to it.
Two more questions.
Two more questions, he's saying. Okay.
Afternoon. I have a question about so long story short, I was a teacher and school administrator in Newark for over 10 years. And I've noticed that a lot of people who went into the profession, similar to me, they were happy about it, they were willing to work hard, have now, a lot of them don't dream anymore. Mm-hmm. They've somewhat given up or seemingly given up, and they're complacent because it's hard work working in some of these urban communities. So I guess, what advice would you give someone who is interested? Because I would want people to try to dream more, because I don't think I've given up. But I do know I have the luxury of working at a university, mm-hmm. so I'm not in the day-to-day like I was before, but I spend a lot of time there and I kind of get it. Mm-hmm. So, and I still have lots of relationships with teachers, but again, a lot of people who know what they're doing have seemingly given up their dreams. Now they're just going through the motions. So what advice do you have for them?
So part of, I think, the frustration that people feel is that it's an overwhelming task. It's so much stuff that they have to attend to. So I try to encourage teachers to think about that one thing you want to accomplish this year. Don't beat yourself up because you didn't do the 99. Work on the one. What's the thing you want to get in charge? And then try to really focus on those things that you could control. At some level, the subversion that you have to participate in has to be really well thought out. You know, I think what happens is you get people that just blow up. They've had enough. And years ago, I was picked to lead this an individual, a program that our superintendent had come up with for getting those kids. We were missing some kids in the middle. Like, we had all these programs for the kids who were the lowest of the low. And we had kids who were on grade level and better, but there was a group that they were low, but they weren't the lowest, and they weren't at the level. So he developed this program, and it was a pilot program, and it was 100 schools they did it in. And I was the person chosen to do it for my school. And because we were kind of making it up as we go along, it was confusing. Every week it was a new directive, you know, and so we'd have these meetings, and people would be, you know, be like a room like this, and people were just yelling and shouting at because they tell us a new thing. Like last week they told us to do this, now they're telling us to do this. And I would never be yelling and shouting, and so my friend who knows me well said, "What's up with you?" I said, "What do you mean? You ain't protesting against none of this stuff they're telling us to do. And I know you, you know, you usually be," I said, "'Cause I'm not going to do it." And there's no point in me standing up and telling them I'm not going to do it. I said, when they go to inspect, they going to look at y'all who's yelling and screaming and carrying on, and I'll be the one over there doing what I want to do. So sometimes you have to convince people that what they're thinking of doing. Now, when I did the study of the Dreamkeepers, I had a teacher who was just the same way. She said, "I'm not actually using the book they said we have to use, but I'm not going to tell him that." So having folks think about what's the thing you want to get accomplished, and knowing you can't get it all accomplished, and what do you have to do in a subversive way to make it happen. Because a lot of times if you try to go through the channels, if you try, the answer is no. The answer is no. So I think people have to have some sense of accomplishment, that they're making a difference, and help them focus on what's that thing I'm going to make a difference with. I think we got one more question.
One more question.
One more question? Yeah, I think someone right here.
I recognize we're short on time, so my question is quick. What's next for you? What do you see as the next chapter?
Well, Jim Banks has been on me to write this, you know, do this compilation of my work. I just can't imagine somebody wants to read it again. So I'm trying to think of how I could organize it in a way that would make it a little bit more novel. I do have another book I'm trying to work on that looks at hip hop and culturally relevant pedagogy. So that's, I've started that book proposal in the first couple chapters on that. So that's kind of where I am. Okay. Thank you all for being here.